At 47, Matt is a maiden, but wants to settle downward and begin a household. So, for the at first period, he is immersion by himself in the planet of on the internet date. Matt Carey is fighting to discover the order speech to explain by himself on his on the internet date section. You're an appealing person. You're beautiful, smart, and fun, suggests his boyfriend Maddie, who is help him. Matt responds in a personality-deprecating laughter. You don't include to show too lot while you at first encounter who, Maddie advises. Matt is cautious. The is all brand new, he says, betraying the anxiety he feels at setting by himself out on the date stage. On to his friends, Matt is a capture, a type, appealing man who has had a success career in theatre control with driving to London of his infancy household in the Western nation. Yet, in spite his sure exterior, Matt has struggled in closeness his whole age lifetime. At 47, he is yet a maiden, although he is frantic to discover a affiliate, settle downward and begin a household. To so length in my lifetime I close downward the possibilities of it. I lived in a imagination planet, or put female on a podium as a tool to not do whatever, he says. Matt has fears about shaping shut relationships stock of his infancy in a southward West Coast city. He counts by himself happy to include grown up in an rich region, in 2 older siblings and lot of friends to act in the parks and grit dunes at the regional bathing beach. Later one hot day while he was 8, following game soccer, he walked in a social toilet. 2 men accompanied him in the little, restricted area. One of the men supplemented him on his game, proverb he memorable Matt had one day wavy to them of the soccer tilt. Matt told he didn't recognize them. But the men persisted, inviting Matt a deceiver and proverb they would speak his school principal on his rough behavior. At the spot, one of men sham a ache in his crotch region. Thisum said Matt how it was his error as he had wound the person's ego. He told Matt necessary to rub the person's crotch to do him sense superior. Matt says he knew the wasn't order and begun to scream. The men stored insisting how Matt do which they requested, setting more than blood pressure on him. In the late, he relented. I recall departure household and mum proverb to me, which's incorrect, he says. Matt barely ate how overnight. He says it is difficult to overrate the feeling of mess and fault he skilled. He didn't believe he could speak his parents since he thick felt in several way accountable for which had happened. It was love creature in a car collapse. You don't aware which the Hades's departure on. So you close downward and fake anything has happened, he says. Although he had been deep shocked by the expertise, Matt saw his abusers once again for the following 18 months. He was assaulted on more than rather than 30 occasions in 12 various social toilets or, one day, in a individual plane. One period some men and family united in. They monitoring you by menacing you how things will get worst, he says, accounting why he stored departure behind to the men. Down there's a present of wrong. You're frightened they might murder you so you go on in it. This participation monitoring is a lot worse rather than the misuse, the threats, the wrong ambience. High school photographic of the period show the impact the misuse had on Matt's infancy. A picture of up shows him lucky and smile in a dirty mop of blonde wool. A picture of a year after shows how he had stretched out lot of his wool. While the misuse ultimately stopped, Matt done a pledge to by himself how not one would always wound him once again. He says it was love thing within him closed downward. To a lot of my age lifetime I've had actual problems in sex closeness, he says, though he requested a sex relation. To year I imaginary sex to be thing very deep inconvenient and terrible. Proper a adolescent was hard. Matt says he longed for a tablet to halt his evolving sex ego. He thick felt embarrassed and shamed, filthy on the within, although externally he was a bit of a guy. It was all a front line, he says. All ladies show me concern, especially any lady upcoming onto me, I fair ran off of. My terror was eventually at several spot, they might wish to include sex. game rugby football helping him courier his ego, particularly the fury he thick felt within. Defiantly dealing some players became a way of mastering in the feeling of bullying he thick felt in the presence of some men. Else emotion spike was alcoholic. Matt began potable at the age of 15. By 17 he was theft to foundation his addiction, and by his deceased teenager, he was dependent on alcoholic to get via the date. Initially I drank since of the hum, since I thick felt lot superior creature drunken rather than creature sensible, he says. Matt's potable became so excess how he begun testing outages, tremors and palpitations. One day, following a big overnight of, he had a delusion of Nazi, Stalin and Mussolini permanent near his cot. Instead of break, he solved to sip more than. Ultimately, at the age of 20, Matt had a collapse and was kicked out of college. He refundable to residing in his parents, knowledge he necessary assist. The led him to Alcoholics Nameless wherever he found a feeling of spiritualism how became the base for his medicinal. Upcoming to regulation in his alcoholic misuse permitted Matt to start discovery up on his sex misuse. For year he had said not one on which he had been via you sense so complicit and the manipulate forces you're silent so you don't speak human beings, you go out of your way to conceal it. It's a deliberate negation to pull through, he says. A counselor emboldened Matt to outdoor up to his parents. Initially, Matt was careful, not needing to wound them. Or, though he knew they were not accountable for the misuse, he thick felt irate how they hadn't been down there to defend him. He says it was facilitating to say to his sibling, Caroline. It was ego of fault, why wasn't I down there for him? I was the older bossy sibling who mind I looked out for him, so it was rather disturbing to discover out that had happened and I was fully forgetful of it, she says. Caroline deliberate counseling Matt to go to the police force, but she implemented down there would be no testimony for a proceedings. Instead of, she proposed to do everything her sibling necessary to assist him heal up and dwell a complete lifetime. Above the year, Matt has been helping by different forms of treatment and by traveling to India and Brazil. He has learned to supervise his emotion triggers and get above his ego of any discomfort on creature constructively shut to else man. But the results include go slow. Matt says it took him 20 years up he was capable to completely recall the compulsion and threats done by the pedophile circle. He says it was just later how he knew, on a profound emotion standard, how the misuse had not been his error. That has permitted me to go striker and let go of the embarrassment, he says. As Matt has been more than outdoor on the misuse he incurred, his trust has grown up. He now helps other who include been via such experiences, and is examining connecting a NSPCC campaigning that helps family aware wherever to rotate if they are offended. But in his private lifetime, Matt's advance has been more than indecisive. Though he completed written his date section, for months, he detained behind manufacturing it dwell. In special, he concerned how dates would ask him to explanation why he didn't sip and why he hadn't been in a relation up. He concerned how his just expertise of sex was the misuse, and how he had never had a relation relying on equity, dividing, goodness and loving. If nobody on a day senses who is keeping thing behind, it can lift alarm signal bells. Perhaps it's top to be outdoor, he says. Eventually he called the bravery to position his section on the internet. Nearly once he acquired several promise responding. Now Matt is prepared for his at first day organized via the website, a coffee in a female in whom he feels he has a lot in overall. He says he is hard difficult not to above think which he will say and which he will do. He feels has done a large move striker. So lot of the embarrassment about the misuse has leftward me, so I don't sense I requirement to apologize for the following effects, Matt says. I'm more than receiving how I'm frightened, but I as well sense agitated as so how down there is in prospect, how my lifetime isn't on the misuse. It isn't all. Matt Carey is a alias.